Welcome to the Jeff and Alex podcast. I am Jeff Hilimire, and with my friend Alex Gonzalez, we explore topics that help you be your best self. And we also get to chat with some great guests. So join us now on the Jeff and Alex podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Jeff and Alex podcast. Jeff Hilimire, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Alex?
Oh, it's great. I'm just another guest that I'm just ecstatic about because she's a friend. And that's probably the first part that I'm just excited to hang out with Melissa Proctor here today.
Oh my gosh. I've been jealous of your interview, which was so great on Disruptor Studio with Melissa. And I've been waiting to get a chance to have her on our podcast so I can interview her a little bit. She's phenomenal. I can't wait to hear what she talks about with her new book, what's going, what her plans are for her career. There's so much to get into.
Oh yeah, and it's great. She is as authentic of a person as you will find, and I loved it. And I think we spent over an hour doing the Disruptor Studio, and so I'm looking forward to today because I felt like we just scratched the surface. And of course, we'll be talking about this a great book of hers that she launched. So, with that, let's not delay. Let's get Melissa Proctor here on the Jeff and Alex podcast. Hey, Melissa, hello, and welcome to the Jeff and Alex podcast. How you doing?
I am great. I'm very excited to be here today. So thank you for the invite.
Oh my gosh, we've been circling this on the calendar for weeks. It's going to be so awesome to chat with you.
Yeah, this is crazy.
Yeah, as we were saying, it's just like it's hanging out in the new world.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah. So there's so many directions we could take this with you. And with our short amount of time, we absolutely want to focus on the book. So I have my copy handy right here.
You're not going to have to.
There it is.
Got mine right behind me.
Exactly.
It's a beautiful book. But I guess for those that don't know,
my favorite part.
Oh man.
No.
Mine's blank.
I got you, Jeff. I got you.
Hey, Melissa, I'm doing a podcast with Jeff. He's yet to sign his books for me.
What?
And we're like, I'm just saying. All I get is a Dragon Army coffee mug, and that's all. But.
No, I'm embarrassed. Okay. So you wrote this book while being the CMO of the Hawks, being a mother, with being involved in all the nonprofits that you work on. How long did it take you to write from ball girl to CMO?
Jeff, that's a great question because I didn't set out to write a book initially. It started out as a blog on Medium, and so much of it was just trying to put a story down in case anything ever happens to me. My daughter would know a little bit about my history and what happened and how I became the person that she knows, but never intended for it to be a book. So long answer is probably like 4 years and change. But, the actual book writing process, once I made that decision, was closer to 2 years.
It's funny because, of course, I feel so inferior here because both of you are published authors now. I'm here working on a book, and Jeff, I remember, and I always love when I'm right, Jeff's wrong, but in this case, Jeff was telling me a little while back, as I said, I'm going to write a book, I'm going to dig in, and I'm going to get it done in 6 months. He's like, it's going to take you a few years, just matter of factly, and here we are, like it's getting there. So I definitely appreciate the 4 years. What was a trigger point then for you in terms of, in that inflection point, you're blogging and all that, but what was that kind of point where you said, it's time to do this?
It was interesting because even from before I got to the Hawks, whenever I would speak and do any kind of, have conversations with whether it's senior executives or, young professionals, I would talk about my story and how I started out as a ball girl for the Miami Heat, even during my years at Turner Broadcasting. And everyone would always say, you should write a book. And I never thought that I was that interesting or my story was that interesting. And so, throughout the process of writing the blog, I was still doing a couple of talks every now and then. People would invite me and I kept hearing it. And I'm like, you know what, maybe I should. And I had this kind of epiphany one day. I was talking to someone about my mother, and they had asked me a question about something that happened before I was born. And I was like, I have no idea. And I realized I only knew her. My mom was 42 when she had me, and I was her first and only child. And so everything that happened prior to 42 or even 45 or 46, before I really could have a conversation with her, I would have to piece together through other people. And so she passed away before my daughter was born. And I just realized I had all these questions. But after my daughter was born, I even had more, in a different way, as you have different stages of life. And so, the whole idea for me of putting down this blog, and I sucked at blogging. I mean, I tried. I said, I'm going to write an entry a month, to your point. Like, oh yeah. And after a year, I had like 3. So, I said, maybe it would be better for me to actually put this in a book and concentrate the efforts on telling a complete story. And I had there was a local contact I was talking to around some work, and he mentioned he was working on a book. And I was like, oh, really? I was thinking of doing something. And he said, let me introduce you to a local publisher I know, a woman named Renita Bryan. And I said, okay, Mind Matters Publishing. I said, oh, that sounds good. A year later, never got a chance to connect, and ended up reconnecting for something. And he's like, oh yeah, by the way, I didn't forget you. Yeah, let's set up this lunch. And so we ended up setting up this lunch. And that was literally the beginning, because once I actually had a writing partner and a process, for distribution, that made all the difference in the world, because it made it real.
Yeah. And probably helped with accountability, I'm guessing too, right?
100%. And even with the accountability, it was more in partnership, because initially I went into that project, and Renita and her team are fantastic. And we said, hey, this is the package. This is what we want to work on. This is how we can help you and edit. Do you want to do the writing? And I was like, absolutely. I'm going to write a chapter a month. A year later, again. And so it was great, because she would ping me and say, hey, Melissa, where's your work? Where are we? And so it was helpful, because after that first year, I said, look, I need some help in order for this to really get done. And it was helpful for me just in the different tools and tricks that they have, whether it's dictation, having someone listen, interview you, pull stuff out. It still required a lot more research, even though the book is about me.
Yeah.
Going back through old photographs, having conversations with family members, really kind of piecing together what I remember things being, as opposed to what really happened, and the stories in between. So it was a really interesting process. And I think, getting the story out was almost the easy part, but putting the book together and figuring out chapters and naming and, pricing strategies, or all these things I had never even thought about. And the irony was, we had gone through all these different parts in the process. I got to the end, and we were approving creative for, I think, the cover. And I was writing a synopsis with her, and we were editing the synopsis back and forth. And she was like, okay, you're done. And I was like, wait, what? Like, what do you mean done? Like, this is a lifetime process. We're just going. And she was like, no, I mean, I think we're in a good place. You're done. I don't want to belittle you at all, but have you thought about marketing? And I had not given one thought about marketing the book, even though the book is called, CMO, because that wasn't my goal. It was like, I finally have this artifact that I wanted to have for my daughter to tell this story. And so it's been an amazing journey, just the people that I've met, conversations I've been able to have. Could never think in a million years that it would have happened.
And it's interesting, you mentioned something about you were trying to remember stuff about your own life as you started going through this. So how was that process? I mean, was it sitting down and really extracting memories? Did you talk to your family? Because I think because by the way, it also makes me feel like there's so much I'm like, oh, I don't remember this. There's something that happened in this life, but we don't naturally categorize or write our own book as we live our lives.
Exactly. It was a little bit of your own trips down memory lane. I talked to my dad a lot. So even in the beginning of my book, I talk about,
awesome.
Growing up in Richmond Heights and going through Hurricane Andrew, which you and I had discussed previously. And, remembering the names of our neighbors. And I was like, oh yeah, wasn't it this? But I was like, oh no, it was this. He's 80. So I kind of take some of that with a grain of salt. But I think it was even fun just having those conversations and reliving some of that. My cousin Cecily, I dedicated the book to her in part, and she helped me a ton. Like, while I was editing, I would send her chapters, and she would be like, hey, you should talk about this. Remember your mom used to do this. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're right. So that part was great. It was almost like reliving it.
And so I find it so interesting. You wrote the book essentially for your daughter, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So one of the things in Stephen King's book on writing, where he sort of talks about his process, he says you should write for one person. and that creates the most sort of singular, concise story. And I felt that in reading this, that I couldn't tell that you wrote it for your daughter, although you sort of say that, but I could tell that it didn't switch around in terms of who it was trying to talk to. And I really appreciated that about the book. The other thing I found interesting and really helpful is that it's part autobiography, but also I would say part sort of leadership and living a life of, I wouldn't say focus as much, because you're very kind of deliberate about saying, look, I didn't have like a master plan. I think you've told me I didn't set out to be a CMO, and yet your book literally has CMO right on the cover. Right. And so, but you do such a great job through the book of talking about your life and your stories, and then weaving in the lessons you learned, which then guided you along the way. And when you set out, was that sort of the plan, or was it like, I'm just going to write sort of my story?
It was very much the plan, because my blog started out in that way. And it was, here are random tidbits or stories or experiences that I had. And I forgot what I called them in the blog, but it was like my kind of keys to the game or takeaways from each blog entry that I wrote. And I'm a very much a Cliff Notes kind of girl. So even the book itself, I was like, we're not trying to write Gone with the Wind here. Like the idea was, how do we keep it short, succinct, to the point? I want her to actually read it and maybe go back and read it again. And a lot of times really big business books or even memoirs can be overwhelming for some people. Like you look at it and it just kind of sits there because it looks like too much to get through. Or I've had more comments than anything from people saying, oh my God, I actually read the whole thing. Like it's been years since I read a whole book. It was an easy read and I got so much from it. That was absolutely the goal. But it's like, let me give you this story, but here's what you really just need to take away. And I'm glad that you got that from it, because in writing it for her, it was, I want you to know the stories, but here's the stuff that I really learned that I hope you don't have to do the same missteps or have to go through the experiences that I had to. You kind of have a leg up, because hopefully you'll know this based on my experience.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, Melissa. First of all, just kind of a shameless plug here, but of course, you and I had a conversation not that long ago for the Disruptor Studio, and we'll put a link in our show notes here. And Jeff tells me it's his absolute favorite podcast ever, and I think, you know, he's rating it 5 stars, or he will be shortly if he hasn't already. But
Thanks, Jeff.
But one thing about even in the series, but I think comes so much from your book, is about how authentic you are. And I mean, it's just the first time I met you, I think it was at a marketing roundtable or something. Yeah. I mean, your authenticity was like, you know, I don't know even what the conversation was. It's just very clear that you're confidently authentic. And I think authenticity also ties to vulnerability, being comfortable being vulnerable. But talk a little bit about within the book, because this is like vulnerable, not just at a professional level, like it's okay to challenge me, whatever. I mean, you're getting into kind of your life and things that, you know, as a teenager, maybe you didn't want to talk about. I mean, so talk about that level. How was it hard to get to that level of vulnerability for the book?
You know, that's a really great question, because in writing it, there were chapters that I took out, and it was kind of going through the editing process. We're like, well, should we really, like, does that help to tell the story, or are you just putting in information for the sake of wanting to have verbal diarrhea, like to tell everything? And I am naturally a pretty open person. I don't know why, but I also feel like that authenticity or that openness is what makes it relatable. My story, when I speak to people, as well as in reading it, I've had people say, I read it, I felt like you were talking to me. This in the word choice and everything else. And I don't know how to be anything else but who I am and how I am. And so in talking about that in the book, it's almost like it's part of the subject matter and the topic. But if you can't be that in the actual document itself, that kind of defeats the purpose. And so, you know, it wasn't difficult for me to share, but what I honestly didn't think about, to Jeff's earlier point on writing it for my daughter, I was writing it for her. So that's my audience.
Yeah.
I didn't expect for my colleagues to read it and, you know, people on my team to read it. And they're like, oh my gosh, Melissa, I didn't realize that you did this or that happened. And so that part has been interesting for me, because it's almost unintended circumstance, but not in a bad way. Because now it opens up dialogue for new conversations that, you know, I've had people who were my family members or friends, like, I had no idea that you did this when you were in London, or that, you know, you created this magazine to get your job at Turner. So it's almost like people have a different knowledge or awareness of me in different ways. But, you know, I still think there's you have a private life, and there's still more personal things. Obviously, it's an entire lifetime. But I think there's definitely a lot more in it than I really thought I was exposing or giving away. But now I mean, hey, it's in the world. It's a testimony, and I'm grateful to be able to share it.
Yeah, it's so funny. You talk about people saying, I didn't know this about you. I write my books in first person, but they're not really me, but they're sort of me. And so I say that to say so many people have said that based on my books, like, oh, I didn't know you did this. And I'm like, no, actually that was made up. Or the worst time was a friend of mine asked for advice. She said, oh, I love how you run your teams with this model. Can you help me? Because I'm really bad at that. And I was like, actually, I'm really bad at that. I wrote that because it's something I wish I was doing. So at least you have truth out there about you. I've got all this misperception.
But the vulnerability, it seems like though, I think for anybody who's a writer or a speaker or blogger, once you open up that level of vulnerability, it's almost empowering. It seems like, and it's not that it's a secret. I know it just seems like it's empowering with so much. Oh, there we go. We got the true story. The person you read the book for.
This is my daughter, Marley.
Hi, Marley.
Yeah. Hey, Marley.
It said hi, Marley. Okay.
She's our first special guest on the show, I believe.
She would love to be here and would tell you all about what she learned in Spanish class today as we've been homeschooling. But that is where we are.
Has she picked up and flipped through the book? Because we could ask her a question about that.
Yeah, it's okay. It's all right. I think now that she's 6, we're gonna wait a couple years for her to truly be able to get it. It's funny because she wanted to read it as a bedtime story, and I was like, sure, we can start. And we got through maybe the first couple of pages. She's like, yeah, mommy, let's read Harry Potter. Like she was over it. But it's funny because in my mind, I feel like she could pick this book up at different stages of her life and get completely different things.
Yeah.
Just based on where she is. And so I'm excited for that.
Yeah, wait till she's a teenager. She's going to use things against you probably.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I don't doubt that for 1 minute.
One of and I'm glad she poked her head in because that relates to my next question. So you list out 5 guiding principles that have sort of led you over the last 10 or 15 years. And the last one is that, no matter what you're deciding, specifically towards career, that you must have work-life flexibility / harmony. And I just wanted to ask you about work-life harmony. Again, I started off this whole conversation with I think of you as doing lots of different things, and then to write a book in the middle of it. I know how much being a parent means to you. How do you just think about work-life harmony? Do you shut it off a certain time? Do you have different sort of strategies for that?
My philosophy has always been that life comes before work, regardless. Life comes before nonprofit work. Life comes before 9-to-5 work. And I started that belief based on my mother, because I mentioned I was an only child. When I started college, she went out on disability. And so my entire college career and post-grad, my time at Turner Broadcasting, I spent as a caregiver for a disabled parent. And so I learned more about Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid than most people would know before the age of 30. But there were times she had a stroke when I was it was probably like a manager level at Turner, and had to go to Florida for almost a month to help relocate her from a condo she was living into an assisted living facility. And there was no one else to do anything for her but me. And I had the most grace and flexibility at the time in working with my then boss, Jennifer Dorian, and still maintained a ton of the work that I had to do, but knowing that I could give my all to my family when necessary. And when I'm at work, I can give my absolute best as well. And knowing that it will never be equal. So, that whole idea of it's balance, you're definitely giving all at the same. There's no way. But at the times where I need to be for my family, I can 100% be there. So now I equate it to, if my daughter has to go to a dance recital on Tuesday at 4:00, I need to be in a work environment or even a personal environment where the people around me understand that that's my priority. And I do the same for my teams. I'm like, we work in basketball. We're not playing on the court. So, outside of that, you can't make something. It's okay. Our CEO will miss something. It is okay. And I do think in some cultures and work environments, that's not acceptable. or it's frowned upon because, it's really, we all have to be here. You don't sleep, you work, you grind. I definitely believe that there are times for that. But if anything happens personally, family wise, it has to come before that.
Mhm.
It's just my mindset. And if I'm ever in a position where someone doesn't believe that, that's great. That's not the place where I need to be.
And what's interesting, I think you bring such a great leadership lesson and perspective to it. When we were talking before, you also talked about one of the things that just surprises you or is almost kind of a pet peeve is when people are too in awe to approach you. They're like, oh, you're Melissa Proctor. You seem, and you've noticed it, and you're always in awe and shock, but it goes to show you as a leader how even as hard as you try, and you are, I will tell everybody watching and listening, Melissa is as authentic as she gets. She is so approachable, so engaging. But yeah, you have experiences where people, I don't know if they call it intimidation or what it is,
yeah.
but that happens. So I guess it's important how you model your life so people could follow what you do.
I remember when I first started at Turner, there was a young lady on the team who literally came up to me and said, I'm so glad that you're here and you're in this position, because I never thought that I could be a woman and a leader in this company, because all of the women who either had children and were working, highly competitive jobs, or where they had to be on game days, they all switched roles once they had a family, because there was no balance necessarily in doing both, or the perception of it. I do think a lot of times, even the intimidation of me, it's what the stories that people have in their head, or what they perceive me to be. Right. And 9 out of 10 times, and folks that have said that to me after the fact are like, oh man, but you're so cool. I wish I set up this time with you sooner because I thought this. And it could be based on a title. It could be based on perception. Right. It could be based on what other people have said. But at the end of the day, until you are in the experience for yourself, completely different ballgame.
Man, it's so crazy to me because I've known you for so long that people wouldn't immediately know that you're approachable, even in meetings, because I've been in meetings with you in the business world where, lots of people didn't know each other. And I just feel like your whole vibe is approachable, but I guess, success sort of just, that's a thing. People are always nervous.
So weird to me, and I realized that actually when I first started with the Hawks, because I was a VP of, content and marketing when I was at Turner. And when I got laid off, I was 8 months pregnant, had no clue what I was going to do. And I ended up, at the Hawks in a more senior role. But having grown up in a company like Turner, now Warner Media, as an intern to VP, I had a lot of peers and relationships with people that grew over time. So, lunches, happy hours, friends that you can make. Coming into a company at a senior level completely changes the dynamic, because now everyone is looking at you from a different perspective. So there isn't the, hey, let's go hang out and be friends because either you're the boss. Like, it's a very different dynamic, because I didn't have that same opportunity of growing, not even up the ladder or around the company. And I've made great relationships, and there are people who are amazing, and I'm incredibly blessed and fortunate to work in the organization. But I grew corporately and professionally at the same time. And, what got you here won't get you there. And there's a lot of those learnings that, hopefully some of it is in the book, but so much more I'm still learning every day.
Well, one name you bring, speaking of those relationships, a name that you bring up and you talk about a bit, and I just love, because we all know her as Jennifer Dorian. And I just love the one that you celebrate her, because she's just an awesome, incredible, amazing person, and many levels. But I love that you celebrate what she's done for you. But so talk a little bit about that. What has someone like Jennifer Dorian, what is it that she just unlocked within you and your potential?
Well, first of all, she's just an amazing person. So as an individual, I remember when I first started at Turner as an intern in marketing, there was the marketing department, and then there was the brand group. And the brand group was Jennifer and one other person for that network at that time. And I had no idea what they did. They were like a super secret SWAT team of awesomeness that, got to help define a lot of the foundational work that the brand was built on. So at the time it was TNT, they created We Know Drama and what that meant, and the types of content that we would want to acquire based on this brand position. And it was a very different way to see the world. And I'll never forget my first informational meeting with her. I was like, who are you and what do you do? And when she explained what brand strategy was as kind of the category, the foundation that everything is based upon. So if you look at it as like an architect, like we're the blueprint. and all the network and all the pieces are built on top of it. And she gave the example of, imagine TNT was in an airport and we were going to create an experience. What would that experience be? So the creative part of me was so excited. I'm like, oh my God, I have no idea. What would a TNT store look like in the airport? What would you sell? What would you do there? And I was like, I love that. So my strategic and creative brain was already like firing on all cylinders because it was so intriguing to me. And I didn't understand or know marketing in that way. And so I was like, oh my God, I want to work for you. She was like, everyone wants to work for me, which was the truth. And she didn't mean it in a weird way at all. And, over time, I talked to her about it. She laughs. She was like, well, you ended up working for me. So, it was good. But I almost felt like I learned what I wanted to do next in my first conversation with her. So I ended up going to graduate school in London and focusing on brand strategy because I wanted to know more and learn more. I would ask her for book recommendations. And she, too, I feel is a very authentic leader. She's very much who she is. She's driven. She's wicked smart. And I've learned more through just how to lead, how to work with people, how to build presentations, how to approach business from her more so than probably any other person I've worked for directly at that stage in my career. And so over time, what I am most appreciative of is it's grown from a mentorship to a friendship. Still always a mentorship situation, but we spoke last week. She was doing amazing work around voting and different initiatives, and we partnered and helped, as much as we could to get that word out, to get as many people in the state of Georgia out to vote. And so just her passion and energy for everything that she does is infectious.
Well, one of the things you pick up from the book is the impact that she made, and sort of thinking about your career. The big question that comes out of it to me is, so what's next? And actually, I'm going to read this quote from the book. You say, and I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up, and I'm quite okay with that. Just for a moment, talk about why you're okay with that. But I'd love for you to, you think about your next 5 or 10 years, I'm sure a little bit. What do you think the world down the road has in store for you?
Oh, Jeff. Oh, Jeff. It's a great question. And I really think that, first of all, I was going to have a tagline for this book called How to Pivot When You Don't Know What You Want to Be When You Grow Up. And actually working with Jennifer and some other folks, it was for some people that are unsure, it's the most amazing tagline you would absolutely want to read the book. If you're a seasoned professional who's a CMO, you may read that as, flip, like, oh, you don't know, it's just an accident. You just happen to stumble upon this role. And by reading the book, I think you can figure out directions either way. And so there's a reason why I took that off as the tagline, but it absolutely applies to my life. Those guiding principles are the ways that I have driven my career to date. And so when I truly say any opportunity that comes my way, I hold them up to those 5 guiding principles, and it will inform me if this is a direction that I should explore or not. And so I truly believe that whenever I can do something in my sleep, I no longer need to be there. And so at some point, I can't say that this ever happened with the Hawks since I've been there, because my role has shifted, the business has shifted, we've launched new leagues, new teams. Now COVID has happened. And so our entire world is shifting. So I feel like the lessons and the knowledge are still coming literally every day as we speak right now and entering the start of a new season. And so I feel like I am still in a learning place. After that, I'm open, and it sounds so crazy, but if an opportunity comes my way and someone says, hey, we'd love for you to teach a class at Emory, be a tenured professor, if it matched up with my guiding principles, I would consider it. And so one of the things that I learned early in my career is always have a conversation, because you never know where it may lead. It could just be a relationship, but you never know. And I am a woman of faith, and I truly believe that, God has ordered my steps in everywhere that I've been. And so I believe that whenever that next step comes and shows itself, I will know that that's the right place for me.
Yeah, well, that's evident from your book that you're open, which I really do think it's such a good philosophy for people to have, because you've not only been open, but you've also been driven. And I think you can do both of those things. And so my last question for you is simply, you're going to write more books?
No. No.
Come
Written
on.
one, I'm done, Jeff. It's over. No, it's funny because I decided I wanted to write this book for my daughter. So as soon as I checked the box, that was the next question. I'm like, I just finished the book. My goal was not to be an author, but I feel like whenever I have something else to say, then I would absolutely be open to it. So say my next role is CEO, and it could be like, hey, from ball girl to CEO is like, okay, maybe in that context, in talking about the experience that I've had now and how my world or my professional life or the lessons that I've learned making that transition, I would be open to it. But I don't think I would write one because I want to check a box and write another book. There needs to be authentic. There has to be a reason. Wow. So I don't know. I'll answer your question with I don't know. I can't say no. Never say never. I've learned
for now, we will plug like this book like crazy, and and by the way, first of all, I think I was going to say earlier, Jeff and I had this conversation about this concept I love talking about, which is confusion tolerance, and you are as confusion tolerant in a positive way as anybody else, and I love that your ability to lean into, what, I'll pivot to where it's going to pivot because it's the right place to pivot at the right time. I think it's just a definition of confusion tolerance. We should merge that with that show, Jeff, because I mean, she is. So I love that.
It's funny, we talk about that internally. We call it the ability to play in the gray. And so many times in my career, there are people who thrive on having a blank sheet of paper and not knowing what direction to take, but can build the plane while in the air. And there are more people who need black and white direction. Like, tell me exactly where you want me to go, and I will go there. But if I don't have the clear instruction, then I can't do that. And I think my career, and I really believe a lot of it has to do with my artistic background and creative background, that lends itself to being completely okay with that. I have no issue whatsoever with the not knowing. And every now and then I'm still type A at the same time. So I'm like, I need a list. What's my to-do? What's my next thing? Building a process. But I do think it's the balance between the two, that duality, that drives me.
Well, I'll tell you what, and by the way, as people read the book, one thing that we did not get time to discuss, which we talked during our last chat, is I'm a former Florida kid as well, and was in Central Florida when Hurricane Andrew occurred. And when I found out that Melissa was there during a Category 5 storm and lived through a Cat 5 storm, that section of the book alone is worth the book. And of course, the story, it's pretty amazing. But Melissa, I mean, thanks for being here. It's from Ball Girl to CMO. Hopefully it's not inverted on my screen, but where to find it, make sure you check it out. There's a lot of good stuff in this book. I think and as you can see here, these 30 minutes, Melissa, I mean, this is stuff we didn't even cover in Disruptor Studio. So there's another book in you for sure. There's a lot of stuff going on. So, we'll keep working you, and, our fees aren't that high. We'll do nothing. We'll do nothing but encourage you, but our fees aren't that high.
We can write our next book on innovation together.
There we go. Yeah. You know what? Yeah, there's something there. So, and I'm sure we'll have you back because you're definitely a friend first and definitely a friend of the show as well. And make sure you also listen into Disruptor Studio with that we had with Melissa. We'll put a link there because at the end of it, and I think we spent over an hour together, Melissa also talks about her favorite restaurants and shows and a few other personal tidbits. So you want to make sure you listen to the whole thing. But definitely get the book. And so Melissa, once again, thanks for joining us. You're a great friend. We always love talking to you on or off the air. So thanks for being on the Jeff and Alex podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. If anyone's interested in the book, they can check it out on my website, melissamproctor.com, or follow me on Instagram at melissamproctor. And I appreciate you guys so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And we'll put that in the show notes as well. Thank you.
Awesome. All
right. That was Melissa Proctor here on the Jeff and Alex podcast. Whew, Jeff, I just miss being around people. Oh man, she's such a great friend, such a great person. And I'm like, and you take for granted, I tell you what, you take for granted those moments we've had where like the three of us in a corner, it's after some meeting just chatting. I will never take those things for granted again when we get to start interacting again.
No kidding. And you talked about it on this interview, her approachability. It's just like, you just want to sit and chat. And I know both of us could have gone for another half hour easily, but it was just great to see her and be a part of that. And yeah, maybe one day we'll do one in person with her.
Absolutely. So once again, I know we mentioned it before, but make sure you get her book, From Bald Girl to CMO. We'll have a link in our show notes. Make sure you also check out her interview with me on Disruptor Studio, and check that out as well too. And while you're at it, go ahead and make sure you follow us here on the Jeff and Alex podcast on YouTube, and also on your favorite podcast platform. We'll be coming back with more discussions, chats, and great chats with our friends, frankly. So thanks for joining us. See you soon, Jeff.
Yep. I'll see you soon.